Section 41 of Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ted Leinhart. Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries by Arthur Elmore Bostwick. The Library and the Locality, Part 2. With the average librarian, the practical question is not so much what sum he ought to have to run his library as how he can and shall run it with what he has. Limitation of income invariably limits service, and unfortunately the kind of service on which it bears most sharply is that which is the library's specialty, namely the provision of books. The purchase of books should be the last thing in which the library ought to economize, but in practice it is generally the first. The building must be cared for, lighted and heated. The public must be served. But it is easy to stop buying books, and it is in book purchase that the library with small income differs from its neighbor with plenty of money. There are some curious exceptions where the library cannot wholly control the expenditure of its money, which is regulated by the dead hand of a testator. Thus, the Forbes Library of Northampton, Massachusetts, now sensibly consolidated with the public library of that city, was obliged for years to expend most of its income for the purchase of books, leaving practically nothing for keeping up its building or paying its staff. It was thus rich where a library is usually poor, and vice versa. The earliest efforts at standardization among librarians were directed toward cataloging, and probably catalogers are our greatest sticklers for a rigid adherence to rules. Those who read Mr. E. L. Pearson's column in the Boston Transcript realize that there are some librarians who consider this fact a legitimate target for ridicule, and it is clear, I think, that both the methods and results of cataloging ought not to be immune from modification to adapt them to local peculiarities. Some public libraries are used so much for scholarly or antiquarian research that their catalogs need to approximate that of a university library. Others are of so popular a nature that they hardly need a catalog at all. The needs of a certain community may require the very full analysis of certain books, whereas elsewhere these could do very well with less analysis, or possibly none at all. The selection of subject headings may have to be made with due regard to the use that a catalog is likely to receive. Books on open shelves do not need precisely the same kind of cataloging as those to which access is not allowed. A library's public, too, sometimes gets into habits, and if these are unobjectionable, it may be better to humor them than to try to change them. Some bodies of readers like as many printed lists as possible. Others rarely use them. In some places there is great demand for a monthly bulletin. Elsewhere it is little used. Any librarian who does not stand ready to adapt his catalog in some respects to the character and needs of his readers runs the risk of limiting his field of service. Methods of distribution may require selection or modification to suit local peculiarities. Take, for instance, the choice of a charging system. Which is the best charging system is a question frequently asked of experienced librarians or library school instructors. This query is on a par with, what is the best material for clothes? Or, is paregoric or ipecac the best medicine? A librarian who finds in her new job a charging system that she dislikes, which has been used without complaint for years, should investigate before changing. Acceptance of the system may be simply due to habit. Even then, as we have seen, there may be reason for retaining it, and there is a fair chance that it may have held its ground because it is in some way better adapted to the community. Of course, the adaptation may be to something else. Size, for example. A rapid rise in the circulation may take a library out of the small library class and necessitate changes not only in charging system but in many other things. Someday an industrious student of library economy will tabulate these things that are independent of local conditions, or so nearly so that it is better to standardize them, and tell how the others should be varied with local topography, climate, and population. There is no time for that in a single lecture, and if I can leave firmly fixed in your minds the idea that some things are better standardized while others should be functions of variable local conditions, I shall have accomplished all that I set out to do. I have already noted some of the differences between a branch library and a central library. Possibly these deserve further mention as an instance of the adaptation of methods of distribution to locality. I have frequently had occasion to deal with complaints which on investigation proved to be due to the fact that the complaining reader expected to find at a branch library all the facilities of a central library. He had lived near the central library in one city and had moved to another where it was more convenient for him to use a branch. The first thing that strikes him is that the reference collection is inadequate. He does not realize that the central reference collection cannot possibly be duplicated at branch libraries. Such complaints, however, may often give the librarian a hint. He may have equipped all his branches with the same small, good reference collection, forgetting that reference work varies with locality. Several complaints of this sort from the same branch may indicate the necessity of enlarging the reference collection there, or perhaps of adopting some such scheme as we are trying in St. Louis of a central reference collection of duplicates for supplying temporary branch needs. It is not always realized that the character of the book collection in a branch library is influenced by the mere fact that it is a branch, apart from considerations of size, circulation, and character of readers. There are many standard books in small demand that no library should be without. One copy will serve the needs of the whole town. If there is but one library there, the book must form part of that library's collection. Whereas, if there are a central building and branches, it should be in the central library, not in the branches. It is for this reason that the ALA catalog should not be used for stocking a branch. I know of cases where numbers of books lie idle on the shelves of every branch in a city system because they are not branch books at all. 1 or 2 copies at central would have been sufficient, and to place them in branches has been waste of money. When the New York Public Library took in a considerable number of small independent libraries as branches, I had the opportunity, a year or so after the event, of ascertaining from the librarians what difference to them and to their readers the change of status had made. They were unanimous in saying that although they, as librarians, felt less independent, the service to readers was vastly improved, owing to the fact that the library now formed part of a large system. This is always the result of any kind of union of effort, whether by consolidation or cooperation. The individual is somewhat hampered, but the community is benefited. This, of course, is something of a departure from our subject. Sometimes the chief difference between two localities is in the character and temper of the readers. The whole scheme of relations between library and public needs often to be altered in moving from one place to another. This is perhaps most noticeable in a city where there is a system of branch libraries. The assistant who has been transferred from a Jewish to a Scandinavian district and then to one occupied by well-to-do Americans will understand what I mean without further explanation. But this difference in readers is, of course, much wider than mere racial difference. It may be a difference in social status. We Americans are too apt to pretend that this sort of thing does not affect a public educational institution, but it decidedly does. Some librarians make the mistake of thinking that these differences are racial also. It is a matter of common knowledge among city librarians that in a slum library, the problem of discipline is simplicity itself compared with a library where the readers are nearly all well-to-do. This is often asserted to depend merely on the racial difference between the newly arrived immigrant, Russian, Jew, Italian, or Pole, and the native American. But we find that when the immigrant has learned the customs of the country and has made enough money to raise him in the social scale and enable him to move from his slum surroundings, he quickly takes his place with the well-to-do library patrons. He is more exacting, and his children are harder to manage. The difference is really a social one. The immigrant is accustomed to being looked down on in his native country, to living on little and having few principles. He is humble and thankful for small favors. What he gets at the library fills him with amazement and gratitude. Mary Anton has told us all about it. But the well-to-do citizen, whether by birth or recent acquirement, realizes that the library is being supported by his taxes. He realizes it, in fact, so keenly that he gives it somewhat undue prominence in his mind and sometimes shows this in his treatment of the library staff. Knowing that the library belongs in part to him, he may often forget that it belongs in equal degree to others. He is impatient or even resentful of rules intended to maintain equality of service. His children unconsciously absorb this same attitude. They resent control and are hard to keep in order. Much of the librarian's time must be given to smoothing down ruffled feathers and maintaining discipline, time which ought to be given to bettering the quality of service. Evidently, these two kinds of communities must be handled differently. They call for different training on the part of the staff, a different stock of books, almost for different buildings. Then there is the indifferent community, which may be anywhere in the social scale and which requires special handling. It is even difficult to tell at times whether or not a community is really indifferent. Their reaction to the library is often a phase of the local feeling that is the subject of this lecture. It is present in some communities and absent in others, but its presence does not always mean real appreciation of library privileges, nor does its absence mean lack of such appreciation. Not more than a few months apart, about 10 years ago, 2 branch libraries were opened in New York. One was in Greenwich Village, a district of strong local peculiarities, which I fear it is about to lose because writers have taken to describing them in the magazines. The other was on 96th Street, which was a part of New York like any other. The village took the greatest interest in the library from the moment when its site was selected. The building was watched from its foundation up. Bad little boys annoyed the workmen. Local politicians and merchants congratulated the neighborhood and told us how fine they thought it was all going to be. Everybody wanted to take part in the opening exercises, and nearly everybody did. There were floods of oratory and crowds of visitors. But having obtained the library and done what it considered its whole duty in the premises, Greenwich Village, not being a community of readers, proceeded to leave us to our own devices, and it was only after months of uphill work that the branch succeeded in getting anything like a respectable circulation. On the other hand, the establishment, construction, and opening of the 96th Street branch were treated by the surrounding residents with supreme indifference. No one had asked to have a branch located at this point, which had been selected solely for reasons of topography and population. As the building went up, no one asked whether it was a school or a bank. Nobody came to the opening exercises, and yet when the library began to circulate books, the community responded to such an extent that in a short time the branch was giving them out at the rate of 40,000 a month. Here the interest and pride of a community in the possession of a library building and its disposition to make use of the library are clearly shown to be two different things. In this case, the two communities were parts of the same city, but separate towns often show the same phenomenon. Some of the most indifferent library towns, for instance, are the ones where superhuman efforts were put forth to secure a Carnegie building. A kind of standardization of which we cannot have too little is that controlled by the man who takes himself as the standard, his own ideas, prejudices, and habits. This kind of standardizer is not always aware of what he is doing. He believes that his methods are the best. They may be best for him and possibly for the particular environment in which he has been working. I am not sure that some of our most cherished library habits did not originate in this way, were not originally simply the personal whims of some able and forceful library administrator who was in a position in the formative stage of library progress to impress them on the fabric of our work. Fortunately for us, the men of this kind, in the early history of the library movement, were not only men of force, but generally of common sense as well. Possibly their habits and customs were as good as any others that we might have adopted. I am sure that they were better than some, but individual points of view may in some cases prove disastrous. I remember an English novel in which a local librarian, personally interested in the history of the French Revolution, uses all the available funds of his institution for years to buy books on the subject, building up a fine collection, but making his library useless for its ordinary purposes. His successor, a man with other interests, threw out the whole collection. I have often wondered which of these two librarians one ought to condemn most. Both are examples of the injury that may be done by what we may call auto-standardization. I am preparing this whole lecture with a fear that someone of this kind may think he is adapting his library to his locality when he is only standardizing it by himself. Self-deception may go far in matters of this kind, and there is something to be said in favor of hard and fast standardization without departure of any kind, in that it prevents aberrations such as I have just hinted at. I trust that no self-standardizer is in my present audience. Our conclusion from all this should be, I think, that a library should not only assimilate its methods to those of other libraries, which is standardization, but should react to the needs and conditions of its own surroundings, which is localization. If you would know the extent of this local reaction and the character of its results, ask the members of the library's community, especially if that community is small. And we must remember that no library community is large so far as its direct popular use is concerned. Whether it is in a village or a city, whether it is a central library or a branch, it is effective as a community center only within a small circle of perhaps half a mile radius. The residents of this circle are in a position to give testimony regarding the library's local services. If it has succeeded in adapting itself to local needs, its reputation will be that of a valuable, helpful, well-disposed institution. If not, the neighbors will be hostile, or at least indifferent. Libraries that are in constant trouble with their readers, the object of continual complaint and controversy, generally have the feeling that the fault is with the public. Sometimes it is, for a maladjustment is seldom on one side only. But more often it is chiefly due to the fact that the library has overlooked its purely local functions, while possibly at the same time conforming most admirably to what are considered the best library standards. No library can afford to neglect its special duties to its locality, and if these conflict with standardization, it should be the general standards and not the local adjustments that should go by the board. End of section 41 and end of Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries by Arthur Elmore Bostwick.